It had been 3 months since Emma's surgery. The hospital was back to its usual rhythm, doctors rushing through corridors, phones ringing, patients arriving and leaving. But for Emma, something felt missing. Every day she passed by room 304, where Daniel Reeves once stayed. Every day she paused for a second, remembering his calm voice, his half-smile, the way he used to thank her for every little thing. But now that room was empty. Daniel had left without a goodbye, and no one knew where he had gone. Some nights, Emma wondered if he even survived. Did he go back to his old life? Did he remember her? Still, she never regretted her decision. Saving his life was enough. That was what being a nurse meant to her. But fate wasn't finished with her story. A mysterious visit, one cold afternoon, the hospital intercom buzzed. Attention, staff, all personnel. Please gather in the main lobby for a special announcement. Emma was helping an elderly patient when her colleague, Nurse Kelly, rushed in. Emma! Come on, everyone's waiting. Some big donor is visiting the hospital today. The director said it's huge. Emma smiled politely and followed, not realizing her life was about to change forever. The lobby was filled with doctors, nurses, and reporters with cameras ready. A tall man stood near the entrance, wearing a sharp navy suit. His hair neatly combed, his face calm but familiar. For a moment Emma couldn't breathe. It was Daniel Reeves. The same man she'd cared for, now standing strong, smiling, alive. He spotted her instantly. Their eyes met across the crowd. Emma froze in disbelief. Daniel, she whispered under her breath. The hospital director approached the microphone. Ladies and gentlemen, we're honored to welcome Mr. Daniel Reeves, CEO of Reeves Medical Technologies. Today, he has come to make a very special announcement. The cameras turned toward him as Daniel stepped up to the podium. His voice carried through the silent hall. 3 months ago, he began, I was lying in a hospital bed in this very building. I was dying. I had given up hope. But one nurse, someone I had never met before, gave me something far greater than a cure. She gave me her own kidney, and with it she gave me life. The crowd gasped. Reporters started murmuring. Flashes of cameras filled the room. Emma stood still, tears glistening in her eyes. Daniel continued, She didn't ask who I was. She didn't care about wealth or reputation. She saw a man in needs and acted from her heart. That nurse is Emma Collins. Everyone turned to her. Applause erupted. Emma was speechless as Daniel walked toward her, holding a bouquet of white lilies, her favorite, though she never told him that. He stopped in front of her and said softly, You gave me life, Emma, and I owe you everything. Emma's eyes welled up. Daniel, I didn't do it for anything in return, she whispered. I know, he said gently. That's what makes it priceless. The foundation of hope. Daniel then turned to the cameras and announced something no one expected. From this day forward, Reeves Medical Technologies will establish the Collins Hope Foundation, a program dedicated to funding transplant surgeries for patients who can't afford them. The audience erupted in applause again. Reporters shouted questions, but Daniel wasn't done. He looked back at Emma. Emma, I realized something while I was recovering. I spent my whole life building an empire, but I never built a reason to live. You reminded me that kindness is more powerful than money, so I want to spend the rest of my life spreading the same hope you gave me. Emma, trembling with emotion, could only smile. The crowd cheered louder, but then, in front of everyone, Daniel took another step closer and said something that silenced the entire room. Also, he said, his voice softer now, I'd like to ask if you'd have dinner with me tonight. Just 2 people, not a nurse and a patient. Just Daniel and Emma. Laughter and applause filled the air. Emma blushed, nodding shyly. I'd love that, she said. A new beginning, that evening. Daniel waited for her outside the hospital in a black SUV. He opened the door himself, something rare for a man of his status. They drove to a small Italian restaurant overlooking Central Park, a quiet place far from the city noise. Over dinner, they talked for hours, not about hospitals or surgeries, but about life, music, dreams. Emma told him about her late mother, who was also a nurse. Daniel shared stories of his family, how he lost them too soon, and how empty success had felt since then. When the night ended, Daniel said softly, "Emma, before you, I thought the world had taken everything from me. Now I realize it was waiting to give me something, someone worth living for." Emma smiled, touched. "Daniel, sometimes we save others only to find they save us back." From that night onward, they became inseparable. Daniel started visiting the hospital regularly, not as a CEO, but as a volunteer. He helped fund medical equipment, supported nurses' education, and often joined Emma during patient rounds. The staff began calling them the heart and the hope of St. Mary's. Love beyond wealth. Months passed. One spring morning, Emma walked into the hospital courtyard to find Daniel waiting under the cherry blossom trees, holding a small box. "Emma Collins," he said with a warm smile, "you gave me life, friendship, and hope. Now I want to give you forever." He opened the box, a simple silver ring. Tears filled Emma's eyes as she whispered, "Daniel, are you serious?" He nodded. "Completely. I don't need a big wedding or fancy plans. I just need you, the woman who saved my life before she even knew who I was." The nurses watching from the windows screamed with joy as Emma said yes. Epilogue. A year later, a new hospital wing opened at St. Mary's, the Collins Reeves Transplant Center, built through their joint foundation. It became one of the top medical facilities in the country, saving hundreds of lives every year. At the ribbon-cutting ceremony, Daniel stood beside Emma, now his wife. Reporters once again surrounded them, asking questions, but Daniel's answer was simple. "People think wealth builds legacies," he said, "but kindness builds miracles." Emma squeezed his hand, smiling as the cameras flashed. And as the sun set over the city skyline, they both knew the story that began with one act of compassion had turned into a lifetime of love. The hospital lobby roared with applause. Reporters snapped photos, nurses wiped tears, and doctors clapped with pride. But amid all the chaos, Emma stood frozen, her heart pounding as Daniel Reeves, the man whose life she'd saved, stood before her. Smiling through tears, she could barely believe her eyes. The pale, fragile patient she once helped stand on his own 2 feet now looked strong, confident and alive. As the applause faded, Daniel stepped off the stage, walking slowly toward her. The crowd parted, watching in silence. He held out his hand, his voice low but warm. "Emma Collins, thank you. You didn't just give me a kidney. You gave me a reason to live again." Emma blinked, struggling to find words. "Daniel, I never expected anything in return. I just wanted you to be okay." He smiled softly. "And because of you, I am." The hospital director invited them both on stage for photos. The banner behind them read, "A gift of life, the Collins Hope Fund." Emma could barely process what was happening. Reporters asked questions, flashes lit up her face, and Daniel stood beside her proudly, not as a CEO, but as a man forever grateful. That night, the entire city saw their story on the evening news. Headlines read, "Nurse saves CEO's life, inspires nation with act of kindness." Days of change. Over the next few weeks, the Collins Hope Fund became a national movement. Donations poured in. Hospitals across the U.S. joined the initiative. Dozens of patients on transplant waiting lists got a second chance at life. But through all the noise and fame, Emma remained humble. She still worked her night shifts, still helped new patients, still smiled at strangers in the hallway. One evening, as she was finishing her rounds, she heard a familiar voice behind her. "Still working late?" "I see." She turned, and there he was again. Daniel Reeves, holding 2 cups of coffee. He handed her one and grinned. "You didn't think I'd vanish this time, did you?" Emma laughed softly. "You're persistent," he shrugged playfully. "When someone saves your life, The least you can do is bring her coffee." From that day on, Daniel began visiting the hospital regularly. But not as a donor or a public figure, just as Daniel. He helped organize free medical camps, sponsored patients quietly, and often joined Emma on volunteer shifts. At first, the staff whispered and teased, the nurse and the CEO, but as weeks turned into months, everyone could see it. The bond between them was real. They weren't two people from different worlds anymore. They were two hearts that had found peace in each other. The dinner that changed everything. One Friday evening, after a long charity event, Daniel asked, "Emma, would you have dinner with me? Not a hospital meal this time. Something normal." She hesitated. "Daniel, you don't have to." "I'm not doing this because I have to," he said gently. "I'm doing it because I want to." She smiled and nodded. That night, he took her to a quiet restaurant near the Hudson River. Nothing fancy. Just soft music, dim lights, and a window overlooking the city skyline. For the first time, there were no cameras, no reporters, no noise, just them. They talked for hours, about life, loss, and everything in between. Emma told him how she grew up in a small town in Vermont, how her mother was a nurse who taught her that every heartbeat is a miracle worth fighting for. Daniel opened up about losing his family in a tragic accident and how he'd shut the world out after that. When they finished dessert, Daniel looked at her and said, "You know, when I was on that hospital bed, I prayed for a reason to keep fighting. I didn't expect that reason to walk into my room wearing scrubs." Emma smiled shyly, her heart fluttering. "And I didn't expect my patient to become one of my closest friends." He leaned in slightly. "Maybe we're both learning to start over." The city lights reflected in their eyes, and for the first time in years, both of them felt something they thought they'd lost: hope. A love built on kindness. Over the next few months, their connection deepened. They volunteered together, laughed over coffee, and supported each other through long, exhausting days. Daniel was no longer the lonely CEO everyone feared to approach. He had changed. His smile was genuine now, his presence warm. And Emma, once the quiet nurse working endless shifts, now felt seen, valued, and appreciated, not for what she gave, but for who she was. One afternoon, while they were visiting the children's wing, a young patient tugged at Emma's coat and whispered, "Miss Emma, is that your husband?" Daniel chuckled, looking at her with a grin. Emma blushed. "No, sweetie, he's just a friend." The little girl smiled mischievously. "He looks at you like you're more than that." Emma's cheeks turned red, while Daniel just smiled quietly. That moment said more than words ever could. A proposal from the Heart Spring arrived, and with it came a new chapter. On the anniversary of his surgery, Daniel invited Emma to a garden near Central Park. The place was filled with white lilies, the same flowers he'd once given her during the hospital ceremony. "Why lilies?" Emma asked softly. "Because they remind me of you," he said. "Pure, strong, and beautiful." He took a deep breath, then dropped to one knee. "Emma Collins," he said, his voice trembling slightly. "You gave me life when I was ready to give up. You showed me love without asking for anything in return. I don't want another day to pass without you by my side. Will you marry me?" Tears filled Emma's eyes. She covered her mouth in shock, then nodded with a trembling smile. "Yes, Daniel. 1,000 times yes." He slipped a simple silver ring on her finger. Nothing extravagant, just meaningful. The crowd of onlookers cheered, and as he pulled her into an embrace, the world around them faded away. The legacy of love. A year later, St. Mary's General Hospital opened a new wing, the Collins Reeves Transplant Center, the first of its kind, fully funded by their foundation, dedicated to helping patients across America receive life-saving transplants at no cost. During the opening ceremony, Emma and Daniel stood hand in hand as the ribbon was cut. Reporters asked what inspired them to dedicate their lives to this cause. Daniel smiled and said, "It all started with one act of kindness, one nurse who believed a life was worth saving." She didn't know she'd end up saving mine in more ways than one. Emma looked at him lovingly. Kindness is contagious, she added. When you give it, it always finds its way back to you. The crowd applauded, cameras flashed, and as the two shared a quiet glance, it was clear their story wasn't just about a kidney donation. It was about two souls who healed each other. Final scene, narration style. Soft music fades in, the sound of a heartbeat monitor beeping slowly. Narrator's voice. They say love can't be measured in money or fame. Sometimes it's found in the quiet halls of a hospital, in one selfless act. One heartbeat, one choice to save a stranger. Camera pans upward as Emma and Daniel walk hand in hand through the hospital courtyard. Narrator. And in that choice, two lives were changed forever. Fade out.